Week 7, we're almost done. Coleman's Fall 2015 Certified SBA 7A Loan Servicing Training, Friday, October 2nd. Lance Sexton. Lance, welcome.
It's good to be here today, and you guys are just about complete. Just one more week of work.
And there's the plaque. So, good job, good job. Let's go to the poll questions. What is the average size of litigation budget on your SBA loans that have litigation associated with them? Under 5, 5 to 10, more than 10. We have no stinking loans in litigation, Lance.
I hope they don't have loans in litigation, but it's highly unlikely that that's the case. And I was just trying to get a gauge. One thing I would caution our participants in, if they do have litigation, especially if there's a foreclosure involved, there's a high likelihood that you're going to get close to the $10,000 mark. And if you think you are, my recommendation is to get a budget that is $10,000, get it approved by SBA to avoid any potential problems with those expenses being approved as care and preservation expenses.
Absolutely. What is the average amount of time that it takes for you to get approval on a litigation plan that requires SBA's consent?
I'm just curious about the response from SBA on this. SBA indicates it shouldn't take more than 2 weeks. My experience, Bob, is it's a mixed bag. Sometimes it's less than 2 weeks, and sometimes it's a little more. And do you like my third answer?
I love your third answer. Fortunately, no one is going there. So that's.
I think they're afraid somebody from SBA is on this training, Bob. No.
Very good. A lot of. There. Hold on. Just show the numbers, Joseph. It was 80%. We're less than 2 weeks. So good. That's good. Do you normally? How come they don't match up? My script doesn't match up. Do you get a litigation budget engagement letter and proof of malpractice insurance from the attorney before litigation? Why do you ask this question, Lance?
Well, because I hope the answer is yes. If it's no, don't feel embarrassed or feel badly. But, excuse me, Bob, before you engage in litigation on an SBA loan, you really need a proposed litigation budget from your legal counsel. You need that engagement letter or engagement correspondence. Quite often my engagement letter is an email to the attorney engaging them on a particular SBA liquidation case. And proof of malpractice insurance, just a little FYI, on SBA loans, your legal counsel has to at least have $1 million in malpractice insurance.
Have you ever seen something go awry when they didn't have the insurance? They don't document the file?
Bob, I've not had that issue, but the only way you can get a litigation plan approved is if they do, in fact, have the $1 million coverage. And we've had it's hard for me to believe that a legal firm would not have $1 million malpractice coverage, but we actually had a liquidation case. We were working with an attorney in a small town, and they only had $500,000 worth of coverage, and we actually had to switch legal firms for that reason.
Interesting. Do you have any guarantors on your SBA loans currently discussing an offer in compromise? Are these still as prevalent as they were a couple years ago, Lance?
With me, they're not. I would say in 2010, there was a peak in the number of borrowers asking about an offer in compromise, and they still exist, but I don't think they're as prevalent as they were, say, between the year 2008 and 2011.
There you go. A third of you are in that process. Very good.
But the one thing that kind of speaks to the response from our participants is we had a prolonged period of a challenged economy. And there were a lot of firms out there working with borrowers saying, we can help you get out of your debt. And a lot of, in fact, I had a liquidation case where the borrower was working with a firm that all they did is represented SBA borrowers in an attempt to get an offer in compromise. So it's still something that we'll have to deal with as SBA loan servicers, but just not with the same frequency that it occurred 2 or 3 years ago.
But it's in your toolbox. You should understand it, know it, and use it when appropriate.
Absolutely.
Tell me about week 7. What's my takeaway?
Well, week 7 we talked about litigation plans, and I think the big takeaway from litigation plans that I would like to present is when you're working on a liquidation of an SBA loan, litigation is going to be involved. If the proposed litigation budget is anywhere close to $10,000, go ahead and get the budget beefed up, put a contingency in there, get it up to $10,000, and get it approved by the SBA. I think another thing that's important to remember is once you submit a litigation plan to the SBA and get it approved, if you have a 15% variance in the cost of that litigation, you have to submit an amended litigation plan for approval. It's not a difficult process. It's going to have all the basic information that you had in your first submission of a litigation plan, except it'll have the updated budget information and a brief explanation of why there was an increase in litigation expenses. On the offer and compromise, it's just important to understand the process and understand how you should do analysis when considering an offer and compromise with the SBA.
By the way, everyone should understand that after the conclusion of this class, you will have access to the videos, specifically the reading materials. So say, hey, I remember Lance had this article on helping hints for navigating a purchase. This will be access for Joseph, what, at least a year? Yeah, and if for some reason it goes down and you need it 2 years from now, send us an email and we'll give you whatever you need. And of course, Lance is very good about answering emails from past students, Lance. I see those cross my inbox all the time. You do a good job.
Yeah, we from the original certification series, Bob, last week we got a question from a participant in that program and was more than happy to respond.
Lance is great about that. Very good. Well, speaking of email questions, let's go to one. Yes, we were in error on question number 3. The answer is false. It has been corrected in Litmos. We stand corrected.
Guys, sometimes you have to understand I submit the test and the test keys, and you know, I have big thumbs,
So does Joseph.
Occasionally I press the wrong letter, Bob.
So does Joseph. I'm not going to read this question. What's going on, Lance?
Well, it was a question about swapping collateral, and I think the bank was concerned. Loan closed in April, and just a few months later, there was a request for swapping collateral. And you know, I'm going to approach this a couple ways because they were asking what a prudent lender would do. This is a unilateral action because swapping collateral would be a substitution of collateral, which is unilateral, or you could consider it a release and taking new collateral. All are unilateral actions. So is there a problem with doing this? Absolutely not, as long as it makes good, prudent lending sense. But I think this bank was looking for a time frame because this is awful early in the game. The collateral was offered. The collateral was offered in April, and then just 3 months later there was a request for a swap. I think you have to look at what type of collateral we're looking at. If it was a junior mortgage on a piece of residential real estate with limited equity and they're wanting to swap it for another junior mortgage on a piece of residential real estate, I don't think there really is a time frame. Just do that if it makes good, prudent lending sense. Where I think a time frame may come into play from my perspective is somebody that originates and services SBA loans. If it was the operating equipment from the company, I would want to back up and really pause and make sure that this was a good move. I think a lot of it depends on the size of the swap and what is actually being suggested for the swap. Now, my prudent lending sense says normally I wouldn't want to consider a swap of collateral at least until a loan had a year under its belt. But again, the answer to the question is yes, you can do this. Yes, it's unilateral. But I think a lot of it depends on what they're substituting. In this case, the borrower was wanting several pieces of equipment and vehicles and wanted to substitute one large piece of equipment. It sounds to me like this was operating equipment that may be critical to the success of the small business. So I would have a little concern releasing after 3 months. I probably would want to suggest to this borrower, hey, let's revisit this at the end of 1 year.
I guess my question is, why are we doing this? Why are we taking rolling stock on 7, 10-year loans when the useful life is only 3 years? How do you address that issue, Lance?
Well, that's a tough one, Bob, because SBA loans, one of the advantages when you go out to borrowers in selling the SBA loan program is SBA does offer longer amortization, longer term on assets than most commercial banks would in their normal commercial lending policy. So there are occasions where you're going to have rolling stock, equipment with shorter life that may be amortized on a 7-year period, possibly even 10 years. Again, in this particular case, Bob, I would really want to look at this equipment, how important it was to the small business, and in considering the new piece of equipment, are we adding value to the collateral picture, or are we?
That makes sense.
I mean, I think if the one big piece of collateral was critical to the small business and its operation, and it actually added value to the collateral, I think it's something you should just do.
Yeah, and I agree with you. My question is why we're having rolling stock. Why didn't we have this conversation at the business development, at the underwriting, at the closing stage, not put it on servicing 3 months later? That's not fair. That's clunky. It doesn't seem appropriate. Now, I know there's extenuating circumstances. I understand that. All right.
Well, and the question comes into play, is the loan fully dispersed?
There you go. Follow-up on question. Yes, I understand the process of doing a servicing memo, documenting collateral value, and all of that. Good. However, I guess my question was more geared toward timing of the request. Should there be a blackout period for a loan before the lender considers a servicing action, such as a collateral substitution? I think you've already addressed that, and then you.
Yeah, and I shared with this banker, and it's a great question because I'm sure it's one that comes up. The language specifically from the SOP, and it touches base with some of the things that I was talking about. Is the collateral being swapped similar in nature? Have you done appropriate due diligence? Is there an increase in the collateral amount? If you've got a junior lien, no increases in that senior lien amount. Again, the borrower has a satisfactory credit history. If you've made an SBA loan to somebody with a marginal credit history, which I'd like to believe, Bob, that never happens, but it does. If you've got somebody that's strong individually, strong as a company, and they're just swapping similar pieces of equipment, I don't see a problem with that.
And I liked your analysis, Lance. Let's don't look at the numbers. Let's look how this impacts operations. And
absolutely.
I think that's wise. Perhaps the equipment was obsolete. Hey, we're just going to sell it. You could always,
one key thing, Bob, that the SBA brings up that I would like to lift up, if you look at G, the release and substitution must not impair the ability to foreclose on the remaining collateral. So it's very important to look at what's being requested to be released and whether there's a tie-in or an impact on an existing piece of cloud.
I think this screams site visit also.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, go out there and take a look at the collateral, see what's out there. What's on tap for week 8?
Well, week 8, we take a look at the new unilateral matrix, and quite frankly, it's new as of earlier this year, and we've all probably settled in, but we take a look at some of the changes in the unilateral matrix. We talk about using ETRAN for servicing because that was the big change in the new unilateral matrix. A lot of actions now require that you use ETRAN. Now, Bob, I want to lift one up that I had fun with. I had a loan that we put in liquidation, and we were able to do that using ETRAN. It was not being put in liquidation to liquidate, but it was being put in liquidation for a workout plan, which we discussed last week. On this particular loan, the customer complied with all the requirements of the workout plan, then came out of it and made 4 consecutive timely payments. So I was ready to move it back into regular servicing. If you look at the unilateral matrix, guys, it says you can do it unilaterally through ETRAN. And no, you can't. And I had a long discussion with my friends in Herndon about that. If it goes into liquidation and transferred to Herndon, Herndon has to put it back into regular servicing, even though the unilateral authority matrix says otherwise. We also talk about some common problems in servicing actions. I had a discussion with some servicing officers at the Commercial Loan Servicing Center of SBA who shared with me some of the common problems that they see in actions that are submitted. We talk about how to submit servicing actions. So it's a good wrap up to this very important training on servicing your SBA loan.
The final exam will be uploaded on Monday. It is open book. Take it as many times as you need it. This is not a got you. We just want to do a recap. And please, when you finish it, send an email to Joseph and with your physical address that you want the plaque shipped to. That will help us out, and we will get that out to you. I make Lance sign all of these personally as well, so it will be congratulations. This has been we know you've put in a lot of work, and you should be rewarded, both from knowledge and with some physical thing. Go ahead, Lance.
I was just going to share, I think it's great that Bob actually takes the time to next day air all the certificates to me and wants a wedding signature, because our participants have invested 40, 50 hours of their time and have worked hard to go through the certification course, and Bob respects you enough that he demands a wedding signature from you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with that, we will conclude next week. Unfortunately, I will not be here. I will be on a plane, so I will wish you all congratulations a week early. Well done. And Lance, you and Joseph will wrap it up next week.
We'll take care of it next week. Thank you, everybody.
Have a nice weekend.